On a dark night in late February 1944, specifically the 24th, something happened over the beachhead at Anzio that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of aerial warfare, though the men dying in the sky that night had no idea they were witnessing a revolution. The Allied forces had rushed 2 complete units of a new weapons system into position, burying them up to the rooftops of their trailers in hasty defensive positions carved from Italian soil. When the next evening brought 12 bombers from the Reich streaking toward Allied positions under cover of darkness, 7 of those aircraft never made it home. The mathematics of that engagement would occupy German intelligence analysts for the remainder of the conflict, trying desperately to understand how 58% of a bombing force could be eliminated in conditions of total darkness. The historical context makes this achievement even more remarkable. Prior to this engagement, even under optimal daytime conditions with perfect visibility, anti-aircraft batteries required an average of 2,500 shells to bring down a single enemy aircraft. The German air crews who survived that night over Anzio brought back reports that defied explanation within their understanding of warfare. They described flak bursts that seemed to follow their every evasive maneuver, explosions materializing precisely where their aircraft would be several seconds into the future, anti-aircraft fire that appeared to anticipate their tactical decisions before the pilots themselves had fully committed to them. What these men had encountered wasn't the product of exceptional marksmanship or fortunate circumstances. They had flown into the engagement envelope of the SCR-584, an automated tracking system using microwave radar technology that would fundamentally transform air defense doctrine. This technology would remain almost completely unknown to German military intelligence throughout the remaining years of the war, even as it systematically dismantled the combat effectiveness of the Luftwaffe aircraft by aircraft. The foundation for this technological surprise had been laid years earlier, back in 1940, when British scientists made a decision that would echo through the remainder of the conflict. Through what became known as the Tizard mission, British researchers shared one of their most closely guarded secrets with their American counterparts. The cavity magnetron, operating at 10 centimeter wavelength, was the critical component needed to develop truly powerful radar systems. This single act of technological cooperation would produce consequences that neither ally could have fully anticipated when the exchange was made. While German radar development continued along established trajectories using meter-wave technology that had proven adequate for their purposes, American engineers working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory were pursuing something entirely different. The system they developed possessed capabilities that would have seemed fantastic to conventional thinking. Detection range extended to 40 miles, with range accuracy precise to within 75 feet. The operational frequencies, between 2,700 and 2,900 MHz, corresponded to wavelengths of 10 to 11 centimeters. The system transmitted 300 kilowatt pulses lasting 0.8 of a microsecond, repeating this transmission pattern 1,707 times every second. German radar warning receivers had been designed and calibrated to detect British radar systems operating between 200 and 600 MHz. Against emissions in the SCR-584's frequency range, these German detection systems were completely blind. The technological disparity extended far beyond mere differences in operational frequency. The American system employed automatic tracking through a technique called conical scanning. The radar beam rotated around its central axis, creating a cone-shaped tracking pattern that could acquire and maintain lock on moving targets without requiring continuous human intervention. When this radar data fed into the M9 gun director, an analog computer containing 160 vacuum tubes, the integrated system could calculate firing solutions 30 times per second. These calculations incorporated wind speed, atmospheric density, target velocity vector, and gravitational shell drop, producing aiming solutions of unprecedented accuracy. The deployment at Anzio represented a watershed moment in the evolution of anti-aircraft warfare. After that first devastating night, German air attacks ceased for an entire week. A single reconnaissance aircraft eventually appeared to probe the defences, only to be destroyed immediately. By the end of that same week, 10 additional systems had been deployed to the beachhead, effectively eliminating the air threat to Anzio completely. German bomber crews who had successfully prosecuted attacks against Allied positions for years suddenly found themselves confronting something they had never encountered before. The system's extraordinary effectiveness derived primarily from its complete automation. Once an SCR-584 operator acquired a target and engaged automatic tracking mode, the radar locked onto the aircraft and maintained that lock regardless of whatever evasive maneuvers the pilot attempted. The tracking data flowed directly into the M9 director, which computed the future position where shell and aircraft trajectories would intersect. 4 90mm guns, slaved to the director's output, moved in perfect synchronization with the calculated firing solution. German air crews reported phenomena they simply could not explain using their existing understanding of anti-aircraft tactics. Flak bursts seemed to anticipate their evasive maneuvers rather than react to them. When they initiated a dive, shells exploded precisely where they would be at the bottom of that dive. When they executed a turn, explosions appeared along their future flight path rather than behind their current position. This wasn't the familiar barrage fire they had learned to navigate through years of combat experience. This was precision shooting executed by machines that calculated faster than human reflexes could respond. While German scientists continued hand-building radar sets in small workshops using artisan techniques, American industry mass-produced the SCR-584 with the efficiency of automotive assembly lines. Approximately 1,700 of these systems were manufactured to provide defense against aerial attacks across all theaters of operation. The primary manufacturer, Chrysler Corporation, applied assembly line techniques that transformed radar production from craft manufacturing to industrial process. By the end of August 1943, 610 systems had been shipped to operational units. The Dodge Division delivered system number 1470 on January 28, 1944, with an additional 628 sets allocated to the Marine Corps, coastal defense installations, and spare parts inventory, bringing the total to 298 units. This single corporation's output exceeded the entire German radar production for the duration of the war. The contrast revealed fundamental differences in industrial philosophy between the two sides. German Würzburg radar sets required skilled technicians for assembly, with each individual unit exhibiting slight variations. The SCR-584 utilized interchangeable parts and modular construction, enabling rapid field repairs by soldiers with only basic technical training. Where Germany built dozens of units, America built thousands. The June 6, 1944 invasion of Normandy included 39 systems specifically deployed to thwart Luftwaffe attacks on the invasion beaches. These radar units had been specially waterproofed for the amphibious assault, creating an unprecedented defensive umbrella over the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. Colonel Joseph Priller, one of only 2 Luftwaffe pilots who actually attacked the invasion beaches on that historic day, survived the war to provide debriefing testimony. He described anti-aircraft fire unlike anything encountered in 5 years of continuous combat operations. Not the familiar barrage patterns that could be navigated with skill and experience, but aimed shots that forced constant evasive maneuvering, making accurate attack runs essentially impossible. The Luftwaffe's failure at Normandy cannot be attributed to any lack of courage or flying skill among German pilots. These men flew into a technological trap they didn't understand and possessed no means to counter. The few who survived brought back the same reports that had emerged from Anzio months earlier. Anti-aircraft fire that seemed to read their intentions, predicting maneuvers before pilots fully committed to executing them. The defense mounted against the Führer's vengeance weapons, the V-1 flying bombs, provided perhaps the clearest demonstration of the SCR-584's revolutionary capabilities. These flying bombs travelled at 400 miles per hour in straight lines at constant altitude, characteristics that theoretically should have made them ideal targets. Yet their speed made them nearly impossible to hit using conventional aiming methods and human reflexes. 20 SCR-584 systems were assigned to England's Channel coast with the specific mission of reducing the number of V1 flying bombs reaching London. The 80 guns, equipped with newly developed proximity-fused shells, destroyed hundreds of the weapons. On one particular Sunday, 97 of 101 were shot from the sky before reaching their targets. The statistics documented a revolution in anti-aircraft effectiveness that went far beyond incremental improvement. During the first week of operations on the coast, 17% of V1s were destroyed by the guns. This rose to 60% by August 23rd and reached 74% in the final week of that month, when on one extraordinary day, 82% were shot down. The kill rate increased from 1 V1 for every 2,500 shells fired to 1 for every 100 shells. This 25-fold improvement in ammunition efficiency represented far more than incremental progress. It marked the point where defensive weapons achieved clear superiority over attacking aircraft. German observers positioned on the French coast reported V1s being destroyed with short, precise bursts of 3 or 4 shells, a sight that contradicted everything they understood about anti-aircraft warfare based on years of combat experience. The German failure to identify the SCR-584 as a threat stemmed from a fundamental scientific miscalculation at the highest levels of their research establishment. In January 1943, German radar experts led by Professor Abraham Esau convinced the High Command that centimeter-wave radar was physically impossible to implement effectively. They argued that insufficient energy would return to receivers at such high frequencies to produce useful detection capabilities. Based on this flawed theoretical analysis, Germany terminated all microwave radar research programs. When German forces captured a British H-2S radar unit in February 1943 and discovered it operated on centimetre wavelengths, the revelation came far too late. Germany had already fallen years behind in microwave technology development, creating a gap that proved impossible to close during wartime conditions with limited resources. German intelligence services consistently misinterpreted mounting evidence of Allied radar superiority. Pilot reports of impossible anti-aircraft accuracy were attributed to improved gunner training, better optical sights, or simply numerical superiority in defensive guns. The possibility that Americans had achieved automatic radar tracking at microwave frequencies remained literally beyond German conception until late 1944. Throughout that year, Luftwaffe electronic warfare units operated with equipment designed for an earlier phase of the war. The FUG-227 Flensburg detector searched for emissions between 170 and 220 MHz. The SCR-584, operating at frequencies more than 10 times higher and using conical scanning that maintained continuous lock on single targets, produced emission patterns that German equipment didn't recognize as threatening or even detect at all. Luftwaffe crews flew into radar-guided death traps while their warning receivers remained completely silent, providing no indication whatsoever of the threat locked onto their aircraft. The complete system produced by Chrysler Corporation, designated as SCR-584, integrated with a heavy anti-aircraft battery of 4 90mm guns, a British-invented identification friend or foe unit, appropriate power sources, and the M9 gun director. Each component represented American engineering superiority manifested in different ways. The cavity magnetron generated 300 kilowatts of microwave power, exceeding the output of entire German radar installations. The servo mechanisms enabling automatic tracking achieved precision levels that German industry couldn't replicate with available manufacturing techniques. The M9 director performed ballistic calculations that would have required teams of human computers working with mechanical calculators. The integration of these diverse technologies into a single coherent weapon system represented a conceptual leap that German military thinking hadn't achieved or apparently even considered possible. Designated formally as the SCR-584 anti-aircraft gun-laying system, approximately 1,500 of these systems saw operational use in both European and Pacific theatres, starting in early 1944. Each system could track aircraft travelling at 600 miles per hour, faster than any operational aircraft of 1944, providing future proofing that proved valuable when German jet aircraft appeared late in the war. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe faced a crisis of unsustainable attrition that threatened its continued existence as an effective force. General Adolf Galland reported that Luftflotte Reich had lost 38% of its fighter pilots during April 1944, while Luftflotte 3 had lost 24%. Overall, German forces had lost 489 pilots, including 100 officers during that single month, while training centres had produced only 396 new pilots, including 62 officers. These losses weren't solely attributable to air-to-air combat with Allied fighters. Increasingly, experienced pilots fell to anti-aircraft fire that exhibited accuracy that seemed impossible based on previous combat experience. Ground attack aircraft, essential for Wehrmacht tactical doctrine developed during the successful campaigns of 1939 through 1941, became particularly vulnerable when operating within the SCR-584's optimal tracking envelope at medium and low altitudes. General Galland, in his post-war memoir titled The First and Last, wrote that by 1944, approaching Allied positions meant entering zones where death was mathematically calculated and delivered. The guns didn't aim at where aircraft currently were, but where they would be seconds in the future. There were no tactics that could counter this, no effective countermeasures. Only luck separated those who survived from those who didn't. In December 1944, during the Ardennes offensive that became known as the Battle of the Bulge, German forces finally captured a damaged but essentially complete SCR-584 system near the town of St. Vith. Dr. Hans Plendl, Germany's leading radar expert, led the technical examination of this captured equipment. His report to the High Command was devastating in its assessment. The Americans, he wrote, have achieved automatic tracking with accuracy levels we believed impossible to attain. They operate on wavelengths our existing equipment cannot detect or jam. Most significantly, they mass-produce these systems with industrial efficiency while we struggle to build laboratory prototypes. We are not months behind in this technology. We are years behind with no realistic possibility of catching up given current resources and circumstances. The captured system revealed innovations that German science had deemed theoretically impossible based on their understanding of physics and engineering. Automatic tracking that maintained lock despite aggressive target maneuvers, electronic computation of three-dimensional firing solutions in real time, seamless integration of radar, computer, and weapons into a single system. But this knowledge came far too late to develop effective countermeasures or equivalent systems. The technological helplessness experienced by Luftwaffe pilots contributed to the January 1945 fighter pilots' revolt, when leading aces confronted leadership directly about the impossibility of their tactical situation. Major Johannes Steinhoff, credited with 176 confirmed victories, told Hermann Göring directly that they were no longer fighting enemy pilots. They were fighting mathematics calculated by machines. Individual skill had become essentially irrelevant against automation. Göring could blame them for lacking courage, but courage cannot defeat technology that doesn't exist on the German side. These weren't defeatists or cowards voicing complaints. These were Germany's most decorated warriors, men who had proven their courage beyond any question. Their recognition that traditional military virtues had become obsolete against automated weapons represented a profound psychological breach in military culture. Göring's response, relieving Galland of command and threatening courts-martial for others, demonstrated leadership's inability to accept technological reality, even when confronted by their most accomplished combat veterans. Even the revolutionary Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter provided no escape from SCR-584 directed fire. The jet's 540 mile-per-hour speed, which made them nearly untouchable by Allied piston engine fighters, meant nothing to radar systems designed to track targets at 640 miles per hour. Lieutenant Colonel Heinz Baer, one of Germany's most successful jet pilots, reported after the war that they believed their speed would protect them from flak. Instead, they discovered the American guns tracked them perfectly. The shells arrived exactly where they would be. Speed only meant less time available to execute evasive maneuvers. Several jets were lost to anti-aircraft fire that exhibited impossible accuracy. The SCR-584's ability to track and destroy jet aircraft demonstrated American foresight that German planning lacked. Built to specifications exceeding any aircraft operational in 1942, it remained effective against technology that wouldn't appear until late 1944. The production statistics revealed an industrial mismatch that would have doomed Germany regardless of tactical innovation or individual courage. Chrysler Corporation alone manufactured 298 units. Total confirmed production exceeded 1,700 units minimum, with additional units from General Electric and Westinghouse. Manufacturing costs were reduced from $50,000 to under $10,000 per unit through production engineering. Monthly production rates reached 50-plus units at peak capacity. By contrast, total German Würzburg radar production approximated 1,500 units for the entire war. All German radar types combined totaled approximately 4,000 units, with each unit essentially hand-built and no significant cost reduction achieved throughout the production run. Limited production capacity persisted throughout the war despite efforts to increase output. This disparity reflected deeper advantages in American industrial culture beyond simple manufacturing capacity. The SCR-584 was explicitly designed for operation by drafted civilians with only 6 weeks of training. German radar systems required engineers and technicians with months of specialized education to operate effectively. Beyond raw specifications, the SCR-584 demonstrated practical advantages that amplified its combat effectiveness. Setup and mobility allowed the system to become operational within 30 minutes of arrival at a new position, compared to hours required for comparable German systems. This mobility proved crucial in Italy's fluid campaign environment, where the SCR-584 provided immediate air defense for rapidly advancing forces. Weather independence meant the system functioned effectively in conditions that degraded or eliminated optical aiming methods. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring testified after the war that American radar-controlled anti-aircraft fire made German tactical air support impossible by early 1944. The Wehrmacht, which had pioneered combined arms warfare doctrine in the 1930s, found itself fighting essentially blind, while the Allies observed everything from above with impunity. The campaign against V-1 flying bombs provided quantifiable proof of revolutionary advancement in defensive capabilities. During the first week, interception rates stood at 17% using conventional methods. By the fourth week, this had increased to 60%. By the 8th week, average interception rates reached 74%. The best single day achieved an 82% interception rate. Ammunition efficiency improved 25-fold compared to conventional methods. These statistics represented the first time in warfare history that defensive guns achieved consistent superiority over attacking aircraft across sustained operations. The V-1, essentially a primitive cruise missile, flew predictable paths at constant altitude and speed, characteristics that theoretically should have made it an easy target. Yet its 400-mile-per-hour speed had made it nearly invulnerable to conventional anti-aircraft methods relying on human aiming and timing. The SCR-584 changed that equation completely through automation and prediction. German electronic warfare capabilities, which had proven highly successful against British radars early in the war, proved completely ineffective against the SCR-584. The Luftwaffe's sophisticated jamming equipment, operating on meter wavelengths, produced no effect whatsoever on microwave systems. German Duppel, the chaff cut to meter wavelengths for radar confusion, was equally useless against centimeter wave systems. The failure went beyond simple equipment limitations. German electronic warfare doctrine fundamentally assumed adversaries would use similar technology based on comparable physical principles. The possibility that Americans operated on completely different frequencies, using different techniques, remained unconsidered until captured equipment revealed the truth. By that point, Germany lacked both the resources and time necessary to develop entirely new countermeasures from scratch. The SCR-584's influence extended far beyond the aircraft it directly destroyed. By making German reconnaissance flights over Allied positions essentially impossible, it blinded Wehrmacht intelligence services. German commanders couldn't observe Allied preparations, track troop movements, or identify weak points in defensive lines. This intelligence vacuum contributed directly to German strategic failures throughout 1944 and 1945. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, stated that they attacked essentially blind in the Ardennes. Their reconnaissance aircraft couldn't survive over Allied lines long enough to gather useful intelligence. They knew virtually nothing about enemy reserves, movements, or dispositions. The element of surprise, absolutely essential to their operational plan, proved impossible to achieve when only one side possessed the ability to observe the battlefield from above. For Luftwaffe aircrews, the SCR-584 represented something psychologically devastating beyond simple fear of death. It meant death delivered by machines that eliminated human skill as a factor in combat. Pilots who had trained for years, survived hundreds of missions, and earned their nation's highest decorations, found themselves helpless against automation they couldn't see or counter. The testimony of survivors reveals the psychological impact more clearly than statistics. Captain Heinrich Baer, who ended the war with 220 victories, stated that fighting enemy pilots was warfare as they understood it. Skill against skill, courage against courage, the contest of warriors. But the radar-guided guns weren't warfare in that traditional sense. They were execution by mathematics. There was no honor in dying to a machine's calculations, no meaning in a death that skill couldn't prevent. This dehumanization of combat affected morale more profoundly than simple fear of death ever could. Luftwaffe pilots had long accepted mortality as an inherent part of their warrior ethic and professional identity. What they couldn't accept was irrelevance, the reduction of their hard-won skills and expensive experience to meaningless factors in equations they couldn't influence or even perceive. After Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence officers demonstrated the SCR-584 to captured Luftwaffe officers. Their reactions ranged from amazement at the technology to bitter recognition of what they had actually faced. Many expressed relief at finally understanding what had been killing them and their comrades. Dr. Wilhelm Runge, who had worked on German radar development, admitted in 1985 that they had dismissed every report that contradicted their assumptions about American technological capability. They created elaborate theories to explain impossible anti-aircraft accuracy, rather than accept the simple truth that the Americans possessed better technology. This arrogance cost thousands of lives that might have been preserved with more realistic assessment. The German military's institutional inability to recognize American technological superiority stemmed from deeper cultural assumptions about scientific and engineering capability. The Wehrmacht, which had pioneered military innovation throughout the 1930s and achieved stunning victories through 1942, simply couldn't conceive that American engineers had surpassed German science in any significant domain. This blindness persisted even as evidence mounted throughout 1944 in pilot reports and combat statistics. After the war ended, the radar technology was adapted for use in systems designated ANMPQ-12 and ANMPM-38, serving as components in the U.S. Army Field Artillery Missile System MGM-5 Corporal. The fundamental principles established by the SCR-584, including automatic tracking, computer-controlled prediction, and comprehensive systems integration, became foundational to all subsequent air defense systems worldwide. Every modern surface-to-air missile system descends conceptually from innovations first implemented in the SCR-584. It proved definitively that effective air defense required removing human reaction time from the engagement cycle entirely. This lesson, learned through the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe's combat power, shaped military technology development throughout the Cold War and continues influencing design philosophy today. While complete statistics remain somewhat elusive due to wartime record destruction and classification, available data demonstrates the SCR-584's devastating effectiveness across all deployment scenarios. Confirmed production reached a minimum of 1,700 units manufactured, with Chrysler alone documenting 298 units produced. Peak production achieved 50-plus units monthly during maximum output periods. Combat effectiveness at Anzio on the first night saw 7 of 12 bombers destroyed, representing a 58% kill rate under conditions of total darkness. V1 peak performance reached an 82% interception rate on the best day. Ammunition efficiency improved 25-fold compared to conventional methods. The D-Day deployment included 39 units that provided essentially complete air defense over the invasion fleet and beaches. Technological advantages included detection range of 40 miles, double the capability of comparable German systems. Accuracy achieved 75 feet compared to German systems operating at 500-plus feet. Tracking was fully automatic versus German manual tracking requiring continuous operator input. Setup time reached 30 minutes versus German systems requiring 2+ hours to become operational. The German encounter with the SCR-584 offers enduring lessons about technological surprise in warfare and the dangers of institutional assumptions. Convinced of their own superiority, constrained by flawed theoretical assumptions, and fundamentally unable to imagine American innovation surpassing German science, German leaders sent air crews to face a threat they didn't understand and possessed no means to counter effectively. General Paul Deichmann summarized the failure succinctly after the war. "They believed what they wanted to believe," he said. Every piece of contradictory evidence was explained away through elaborate reasoning. They couldn't accept that American engineers had achieved what German scientists had declared theoretically impossible. By the time they faced reality and accepted the truth, the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force had effectively ceased to exist. The failure wasn't primarily in intelligence-gathering capabilities. German observers reported American anti-aircraft effectiveness with reasonable accuracy. The failure was in intelligence interpretation at the analytical and command levels. The reports were systematically dismissed because they contradicted deeply held institutional assumptions about American technological capabilities. This cognitive blindness proved more damaging than any security breach possibly could have been. The SCR-584 embodied American industrial philosophy at its finest: mass production, comprehensive standardization, and systematic simplification. Rather than crafting perfect individual units through artisan methods, American engineers designed explicitly for reliable mass manufacture using assembly line techniques. This approach, derived directly from automotive production methods, proved vastly superior to German craft precision for military applications requiring thousands of units. The contrast extended deeply into operational philosophy. German military culture emphasized expertise and specialization, training elite operators for complex systems. American design philosophy emphasized simplification and automation, removing human expertise requirements wherever possible. The SCR-584 succeeded precisely because it removed human skill from the combat equation, making specialized expertise unnecessary for effective operation. This democratization of advanced technology proved absolutely decisive in total war requiring mass deployment. The SCR-584 marked the definitive end of aerial warfare as primarily a contest of human skill between pilots and gunners. It initiated the age of automated combat systems that continues accelerating today. For the Luftwaffe, this transition came as an incomprehensible shock that shattered their understanding of warfare. They had entered the war as knights of the air, individual warriors whose courage and skill determined outcomes. They ended it as victims of mathematical calculations executed by machines, their expertise rendered irrelevant. Johannes Steinhoff, reflecting decades after the war had ended, provided perhaps the most insightful assessment of what had actually occurred. The SCR-584 didn't simply shoot down their aircraft, he observed. It shot down their entire conception of what warfare fundamentally was. They thought war was ultimately about courage, individual skill, and force of will. The Americans proved conclusively it was actually about technology, industrial production capacity, and systematic automation. They were magnificent warriors who had been defeated by superior machines operated by ordinary soldiers. The SCR-584 radar system stands as one of World War II's most strategically decisive weapons, not primarily for the aircraft it destroyed, but for what it represented conceptually. It demonstrated the triumph of systematic technological superiority over traditional military virtues that had defined warfare for centuries. The Luftwaffe faced an enemy that essentially couldn't miss because the system had eliminated human error from the aiming process entirely. German pilots never fully understood what they were actually facing because their leadership structure literally couldn't accept its existence based on their assumptions. Reports of impossible anti-aircraft accuracy were routinely dismissed as exaggeration by inexperienced pilots. Evidence of automatic tracking capabilities was ignored as physically impossible based on German scientific understanding. By the time German scientists finally examined captured SCR-584 units and understood the technology they embodied, the Luftwaffe had already been reduced to combat ineffectiveness through systematic attrition. The Germans never knew that American radar had devastated the Luftwaffe because acknowledging that reality would have required admitting fundamental inferiority in science, industrial capacity, and military innovation. That psychological barrier proved completely insurmountable until total defeat made denial impossible to sustain. For the Luftwaffe aircrews who actually faced the system in combat, the SCR-584 represented death calculated by machines, delivered with mathematical precision and completely immune to human courage or flying skill. They flew repeatedly into an electronic killing field where their fate was computed before they even arrived in the engagement zone. The age of warrior pilots ended permanently in the skies over Europe, destroyed not by superior enemy pilots but by American radar that tracked invisibly at frequencies they couldn't detect, calculated firing solutions instantly using electronic computers, and killed automatically without human intervention in the engagement cycle. The legacy of the SCR-584 extends far beyond its wartime service record. It established the fundamental template for all modern air defense systems and proved decisively that in technological warfare, the side that successfully automates the kill chain achieves victory. The Luftwaffe learned this brutal lesson through the systematic destruction of its combat power, losing aircraft after aircraft to engagements calculated and executed by machines that never tired, never missed when properly calibrated, and never experienced mercy or hesitation. The Germans never knew, until far too late to matter, that they weren't actually fighting American gunners with superior training. They were fighting American mathematics embodied in radar systems that turned the sky itself into a computed killing zone where every point in three-dimensional space could be targeted with precision. Their courage, accumulated skill, and years of combat experience became irrelevant factors in equations they couldn't see, couldn't detect with their warning equipment, couldn't jam with their countermeasures, and ultimately couldn't survive through any amount of skill or determination. In that terrible revelation lay the birth of truly modern warfare, where victory belongs not to the brave or the skilled, but inexorably to the technologically superior side that can automate the kill chain most effectively.